see and hear us, and we are live. Be interesting to see how many people join us because we have changed the time again slightly just because I had to get back from Birmingham and things. But yeah, hopefully it'll be a good episode with people being able to hear all the crazy stuff that's going on in general practice. That's for sure.
Yeah. So crazy world in general practice, policy and industrial relations. You wouldn't think so, would you, from how that sounds? But it is quite an interesting world.
It's been a spicy couple of weeks, that's for sure.
Yeah, we were just discussing my my setup, weren't we, Gandhi? I'm in the new study, yet to put things back on the wall, and got the option of a few different like filming angles. So people might see me playing around with how I'm using the space in the next few weeks, which will be interesting. Not sure I've got my desk in the optimal position yet.
Experimentation is definitely a good thing. Hopefully we get to see that.
Good. I'm hoping for some good interaction today as well. Hopefully people will throw us some comments. And
definitely. So hopefully all of you joining us and having the opportunity to sit in, relax and stuff as we go through some of the really interesting stories we've had over the past few weeks. And we have got some really, as we said, spicy stuff as we've got planned for today, as well as going through a couple of documents and also some other news items that are quite interesting and relate to some of the previous stuff that we've covered in the past couple of weeks as well. But I think we need to get started, don't we, Andy?
Let's go for it.
Let's go for it then. General practice is going through a turbulent time, and in particular, it seems like the battle lines have been drawn between the GPC and the government, as well as we are increasingly hearing more about these potential changes that are going to affect general practice as we move ahead. So in this episode, myself and Andy are absolutely going to cover all that and so much more as we, as ever, continue to tech enhance your primary care and learning. Welcome, you GP learners, to this episode. Myself and Andy are going to start covering the battle lines, as I've been calling it for the past couple of days, that are happening in general practice. But how are we doing there, Andy?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, excited to talk through what we've got planned for this evening. Yeah, should we give people the lowdown? Just let them know what's on the agenda for today.
Yeah. Do you want to go for it?
Which is so there's been a further letter in the ongoing exchange of frosty letters between the BMA GPC and Department of Health. So there's been a further addition to that stream of letters, and we'll be having a look at that, discussing what it means. We'll be just highlighting that there's been two key documents that we've been expecting released: that the strategic commissioning framework and the advanced foundation guidance. Sort of consultation has been open, so we'll just be kind of highlighting those and probably having a look inside one of them, the advanced foundation guidance, to see what's relevant for general practice. And then some stories that have caught our attention. So in Pulse, GP leaders seeking compensation for increased workload following IT change failure, and that's something local to Nottingham. So we'll be having a look at that and making sure we don't say the wrong things, being local GPs. ICB redundancy monies found, so that's something that's affecting colleagues that we work with locally. Those ICB and NHS England redundancies, and then also calls at an LMC meeting for state-backed indemnity to cover AI triage and data controller liabilities, which is something that we'd mentioned a few weeks ago on the podcast. So we'll be looking at a story around that. So that's what to expect.
Absolutely. In addition, we're going to be playing our game on our wavelength as well to see whether or not Andy and I are still on the same wavelength. It'll be interesting to see how that relates today, given the fact I've been traveling for most of the day. But let's get cracking with our main story, which, as I mentioned earlier, is basically around the fact that we have battle lines being drawn in general practice. And absolutely, it seems like things are getting more and more spicy. Do you want to walk us through this, Andy?
Yeah, so coming up on screen is a letter dated 6th of November, so fairly recent. It's from Stephen Kinnock, who's the Minister for General Practice within the Department of Health, so works alongside Wes Streeting. So Katie and Stephen and Wes are all on first name terms now in these letters, so it does feel quite personal when you're reading these letters. Dear Katie, and it may be worth just going through, I guess, what we thought were the key points of the letters. So begins with commitment to working in partnership with the profession and reversing years of
zoom in a little bit more, Andy.
And reversing years of underinvestment, but this can't happen overnight. And then he gets down to business after those pleasantries. As I say, we are committed to the contractual changes to online access on the 1st of October. So that's largely been what this dispute's been about, and we'll be kind of picking apart what's happened before this letter in a few moments. Also highlights, actually, it says 85% of PCNs were actually delivering on this in the 24 to 25 year, or at least said that they were and claimed money for it. Just, I guess, trying to diminish some of the GPC's claims around the level of disruption to the profession caused by this contract imposition. And also saying that there's been lots of support for GPs in the form of the GP Access program and support materials and webinars and how-tos about how to do this effectively. So they're saying they have supported the profession. And I'd also say they're talking to ICBs about improving compliance, or how to improve compliance to this contract requirement, which again is perhaps a little bit scary or threatening in some ways to the profession. There's a statement in there, Gandhi, where he says, in the 21st century, patients want and expect convenience and flexibility in primary care, which I thought was interesting, and sort of tries to frame the profession as perhaps being a little bit backward and laggards to technology, which I know you're going to jump in and say, actually, general practice, one of the most technologically advanced areas within the NHS. So that's interesting that statement's there. This, we'll probably get into this in a minute, but this exchange is becoming quite technical and about who agreed to what when around these around the changes that happened on the 1st of October, where general practice was required to keep its online consultation systems open within all of working hours and provide an appropriate response on the same day that had a human in the loop, not an automated response. It's about who knew what when, and there are some allegations, quite big words actually. So saying actually that the GPC and its representatives have been misleading, unprofessional, their behaviour has been unacceptable, that they've attacked politicians on social media, that this is disappointing and counterproductive. So quite big accusations.
Can you scroll down a bit, Andy, because we can't see that bit.
Okay, yeah, hang on. Not in and out, but down. I think what I'm going to have to do is nip to the next page. So, yeah, and then ending with, in spite of all of this, I agree to a meeting. My office will be in touch. So, quite an interesting way to end it. So that's kind of the general sort of tone and candor and topic of the letter. So I think the technical thing here is about when is that the GPC agreed to obviously the contract changes, but the GPC are saying that what they agreed to included that the government would work with IT providers to put safeguards in place to prevent patients from submitting urgent requests accidentally on the electronic triage systems, because of the sort of timescale that these can be addressed, that wouldn't be appropriate or safe. And the Department of Health is saying actually how things were left in the end before the contract was released and what was agreed to actually did not include that statement, and that actually the GPC were aware of that and the GPC agreed to that. So that's what they are disputing. I think also we'll come to a Pulse story, but it appears that Pulse has been provided with evidence that they say shows that the GPC had agreed to a version of the statement around this issue with the Department of Health that didn't include that statement around working with the providers to find a solution. And the GPC have said that it did, and that's what this is all boiling down to. So it's all become quite technical, but also quite frosty and difficult. And what do you think? What's your thoughts, Gandhi? And there may be some things that I didn't highlight in the letter that you want to kind of pick out or highlight there.
So as you mentioned, it's increasingly becoming more and more frosty, and that's probably a good word, although I seem to use the word spicy and things. And I think this is part of the challenge with this, isn't it? In the sense that don't know what happened in some of those discussions. And, Stephen Kinnock has been quite clear that he feels that this information was shared. There is now this question about whether that information was then shared with the wider profession in terms of, the impact that has, and that whether was it agreed, not agreed, etc. This is stuff that I think is having an impact in terms of the transparency that we're seeing with the GPC. So Andy's just flicking to the next part of this story, which is the Pulse article. Yeah. Now, remembering that this is talking commentary, and, there are allegations being made about what people are saying, how they're saying it, and evidence. We clearly have not seen any of this evidence. Pulse say they have, but the key crux of this is now coming through is that on the 24th of February, an email was sent to the GPC stating from Stephen Kinnock, or the team, at least from NHS England, that there was not going to be any safeguards put in place by the software providers, and that was then not seen or shared with the remainder of the GPCs, and that's where many people are now coming out saying we didn't know about this, that's not what we agreed, and obviously the GPC agreed the contract in premise that those safeguards would be put in place, but it seems like that was not the plan in the first place, potentially, and that has some real bearing in terms of where we move forward. Because added to all of this, we've had the GPC conference the other week, in which case they have pushed through for the first time in a very long time the premise of putting undated resignations through from general practice. And in order for that to work, they need the mandate from the profession. And in order to get the mandate from the profession, they need the trust of the profession. Mm. And this raises some questions on that. So is it politicizing or whatever the word is? I don't know, but it's feeling a bit like a soap opera at the moment.
It is. It's difficult. It's frosty. It's these letters to people using their first name just in quite a passive aggressive sort of way feels quite uncomfortable, I think, to see moving around in the public domain. I've been trying to sort of think what's going on here. Really, is this a sort of psyops from the government to sort of divide the profession and erode the faith it has in its leaders, and sort of undermine the ability to act together potentially, or is it just genuinely a dispute about kind of who knew what when, with two versions of events, and actually both sides just really believing that they are right and feeling that they shouldn't be the ones to back down on this. I think it's interesting that so in Katie's letter that she sent last time, she did try and shift. So we covered that in our last episode, and I think that was dated about the 29th of October. She addressed this, and then she did try and shift the conversation to the negotiations around other aspects of the contract, which we're expecting to be negotiated within this parliament. So before 2029, hopefully, but hopefully before that. And she tried to sort of use that as an opportunity to lay out the BMA's position on that. And that letter was quite interesting. It's interesting that Stephen Kinnock has taken it straight back to like really just focusing in on this issue and making accusations that undermine Katie Bramall-Stayner's sort of position and conduct. I think that's interesting. Wondering, do they want to kind of undermine her position leading the GPC? Do they think they might get someone softer instead? Is there really anyone softer out there at the GPC? I'm making a lot of speculations. So stop me, Gandhi, and say something.
I think that there is this perception, and some of this plays out in the court of public opinion as well, doesn't it? And one of the things we have seen when it has come to these negotiations and potential aspects of strikes and things, it comes down to the trust of the profession. And we've seen that with the junior doctors, haven't we? That actually, as the successive strikes have happened, there's this question as to whether or not they are still have the same faith in terms of the actions that they're taking and the impact that's going to happen. And that's very relevant with the fact that we've got more resident doctor strikes coming up shortly. And as the general practice profession looks towards, the concept of the closest thing that we can do to strike, which is handing back, our contract and providing undated resignations, which is a massive ask.
And that's very different as well to
Yes,
to striking in
very
terms
different.
of
It's a
the professional
considerably
and personal risk
different
that it places
ask.
partners under. Yeah.
And, I think the question comes to how you even frame that as a question to the profession, because, I've heard various different aspects. If the contract rise was 2.5% for 26, 27, would you hand back your contract? Because does that mean that you are sustainable if that was the rise that we were to see in the following year? And interesting, I've seen polls where people say yeah they would, because it's becoming so challenging to run a practice at this point with the financial provision that we are having, given the fact there's been such serial defunding by the previous government, but also with the current government, although they have had increased funding that they provided, with that has come very much increased pressure of requirements of the service, with looking at reform as well, uncertainty about some of the contracting mechanisms, which we're going to talk about in a second. So is it better? I don't know, really don't. I think there's a lot of people who are probably feeling it isn't right now, and that brings real challenge. And the only way I think the government can make sure that they have a better chance with this, it is to basically paint the GPC in a bad light, because they know if the profession does unite behind the GPC, then they're really going to struggle.
Okay, so potential psy-op going on with
Who knows?
Department of Health. Who knows? I think it's a shame that it does kind of draw the discussion away from what I think that we should be talking about, which is the content of the next contract that we're negotiating, and perhaps some of those bigger issues around the big liabilities that partners still hold. There are things that the BMA are hoping to include in the new contract to reduce those liabilities, or have different ways that GPs can hold contracts, and all of those things are quite exciting to me in terms of how they will support the sustainability of GPs and the partnership model, which is how the majority of GP practices operate. But we don't seem to be talking about that. We're just talking about the contents of letters, in February to April 2025 around this very specific issue, which feels like a shame to me. And I think Katie did try and steer it away from those issues, but it's been brought straight back to that by the Department of Health. But yeah, we will be watching this space for you and bringing you updates.
Definitely. And I think one of the key things with this is that, we are going to see this play out, as Andy mentioned, in various different ways over the next few weeks. And I think there's going to be increasing amounts of, discussion and stuff. We'll be here to try and cover that as best as we can for yourselves. But also with that, I think there is that aspect of talk to your neighbours, talk to your, colleagues and stuff, and, feed that into what your LMCs or your GPC representatives are also doing, because I think there seems to be, Andy calls it PSYOP, divide and conquer, whatever you want to call it. There seems to be a slightly different tone and agenda we're seeing with some of these communications, and there are challenges that need to be addressed. Absolutely, there needs to be some transparency around this. If the GPC did know and it wasn't shared, or there was an error in this, then there needs to be clarity in terms of why that was the case. But again, is the profession going to ask for different changes and all that kind of stuff right now? I don't think that's the best thing for the profession, to be honest, but who knows?
Okay. Gandhi, I feel before we move on, I should be clear that I'm being playful with my suggestion of PSYOPs, and really what I think is that this is, groups of people with their backs up disputing, specific facts where they feel they're right and that the other person's wrong. And I don't really think there's anything more going on than that. But
we like to muse, bring a little bit of sci-fi into it. We need to bring Picard back, and then that'll balance it out, won't it, Andy?
Yeah, he's coming back. He's in a box over there, so he'll be back on the wall soon. Cool. So next story is that we're awaiting quite a lot of guidance coming out in the next few months, as it always seems that we are. We've got neighborhood guidance coming out soon, but we've recently had the strategic commissioning framework released. Now, this is something that we're going to do a bit more of an in-depth episode on. There we go. This is just the release page on Department of Health's website. That came out on the 6th of November. So we want to bring you some content on that. It's going to be relevant for people who work sort of within and with ICBs, which is actually really the majority of us, and people who work in primary care networks who have quite close proximity to people working within the ICBs, and I guess other providers, because there's going to be a big shift in terms of what's done within ICBs as they move towards being strategic commissioners, and things that ICBs currently do moving out to providers. So that provides some further information about what's happening. So we'll aim to do some content on that in the very near future. And then the other piece of information or document is the Advanced Foundations Trust program. This is guidance for applicants. There's a consultation open about this program that runs from sort of now 12th of November to the 11th of January, and following that they'll update some policy and guidance for those trusts who might seek to become advanced foundation trusts. And I think the idea is that by 2035, which feels like a long time away, but it'll be honoured in no time probably, they want, I think, most trusts to be operating as advanced foundation trusts, and they're going to be a key sort of pillar of the new structure of the NHS. So I think, Andy, I think you've had a chance to have a look at this and consider what might be relevant for general practice, and that's probably around the areas of contracting. Do you want me to open up one of the documents, Gandhi?
So weirdly, this is one of those situations where when we talk about relevance for general practice, it's the Annex 2 that we need to have a look at. And the reason why I say that, so the actually probably is worth opening the main page, if that's all right, Andy. Because what this talks about is how they may, well, first of all, why they want to bring in this concept of advanced foundation trust, what that might look like, and what is the abilities that gives. And basically, it talks about the fact that they want to have reduced that for those foundation trusts that are operating at a good space, that have shown pedigree with leadership, and that can potentially show deliverability with additional services, they recognize that they want to move away from a more top-down oversight and give them a bit more freedom. And it does require this to be organized with particular criteria, but it does mean that they don't have to do as much of the monitoring and that kind of stuff as a result of it. And the reason why that's important is that these trusts are going to be announced. I believe they may have already been done so, although I can't remember seeing the list exactly, but I believe it's a list of 12 potential trusts across the country. And this is actually moving with a plan that this will come into effect in 2027. So it's not something that happens straight away. But in addition, there is this concept that these trusts potentially could also become integrated health organizations. And the reason why that's relevant for general practice is because of the fact that that means that they can then manage the GP contract as a result of that. Now, in this document, it doesn't mention general practice at all. That's one thing I will say. It doesn't mention, I think it maybe says primary care once. It talks about the fact of working with primary care contracts in the context, and I had to read it a couple of times, in the context of the trust still has to, do the work in line with the primary care contracts and things that are happening. But like I said, it's in Annex 2 where it details in a bit more aspects that this then allows the advanced foundation trusts to potentially become integrated health authorities in the future.
So I'm in Annex 2. Shall I?
Yeah. I think it's the bold bits. If you just go back up a little bit, I have to admit I didn't get through the table. The internet cut out on the train at that point and stuff. I was reading it back. But basically, it talks about working beyond its organizational boundaries in partnership with other organizations. So it's the third one down. The ability to act as a trusted, sorry, Andy, I can't read. It's a little bit small, and broad support from system partners in the IHO proposals.
There we go. So for me, obviously, it's a little bit, I guess, light on the on detail or being absolutely certain about it being a consultation, but integrated health organizations, I think we've heard, are going to be a contract rather than actually an organization, even though they're called integrated health organizations. So they'll probably be operated by other types of organizations. Certainly trusts and these advanced foundation trusts will be good sort of candidates to operate these contracts. I think we've heard that they're likely to be large contracts covering large areas. They will need organizations with broad shoulders and the ability to weight bear, which I think means the ability to sort of handle the risks around large budgets, which means quite large organisations with
and we are
financial
talking large.
relevancy.
So as an advanced foundation trust, one of the things it comments is that they don't have to have approval for work that they're doing under £100 million.
Yeah, so huge. Yeah, we've got any indication of the kind of geography that an IHO contract might cover, Gandhi, or an acute trust?
That doesn't appear to be detailed in this. So yeah,
that's okay. So I guess the implication is then that these organisations might manage the GP contract, but then also these organisations will be positioned to hold sort of MNP contracts. I guess potentially even the small neighbourhood provider contracts as well, and multi-neighbourhood provider contracts. In the 10-year plans description of those, it talks about them having a role in supporting practices that are struggling to meet their requirements. And I think there was sort of indication that might even involve taking on management of their patients. I might be remembering that wrong. So so potentially, very relevant activities and roles for advanced trusts, advanced foundation trusts that have implications for general practice. I think we need to learn more, I guess. But I think that's very.
And again, this is not something that comes into effect straight away. The planned time frame for this is looking at these potential candidates for 26-27 with the view for it starting from 27 at some point. So this is stuff that we will see in more detail. As Andy mentioned, the strategic commissioning guidance probably some more relevance, but we needed a bit more time to go through that, so we will cover that in due time. Right, we're going to move on to our wavelength, Andy.
Yes, let's go. If people have comments about those letters or about advanced foundation trusts or strategic commissioning, please pop them in the chat. We'll bring them on the screen. But perfectly happy if people are just watching and soaking things in. So wavelength.
Yes. So just a quick reminder, Andy's going to see if he can guess where he is on the wavelength. Here we are. That's what it looks like. I'm going to spin it round and give him a clue, and let's see how well he does. So closing it off. Spin, 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 spin. Okay. And we've got that, so I know where it is. And Andy, your spectrum in terms of what we've got is let's get me get this right. So this side is admit and this side is self-care. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep.
All right. So relevant in one of our new stories that's going to come up in a bit, potentially. But okay. So the clue I'm going to give you is a 25-year-old male with no health issues, but a respiratory rate of 35.
Oh, okay. And no other information.
See, I can't give you too much information.
Hopefully, he's not just ran up a hill. I'll assume that's at rest.
So he's come to see you in clinic. Obviously, this is not just somebody you're walking across.
Sat in the room. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, I'm going to go for, so straight up would be 90 degrees, straight across all the way is 180 degrees. I'm going to go for 140 degrees.
140. So that would be
about there. Yeah.
So self-care this side, admit this side, and you're going for about 140, which puts you there, correct?
Yeah, maybe even more.
A bit more?
Yeah, slightly more. Yeah, stop.
Okay, cool. So EGP learners, those of you joining us live, let me know in the comments if you've got any answers that you want to put down, remembering that this would be 0 and this would be 170, I think we're calling it. I need to measure this one day and find out exactly. So put down the degrees of where you would put it. Andy's put it about...
Actually, Gandhi, all the way. Ramp it all the way. I'm sending this guy in.
You're sending him in?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, fine. So we'll come back to that towards the end. In the meantime, though, let's go to our news updates. So this is a selection of stories that we've gone through in terms of the recent news media. And we're going to cover a variety of things in rapid succession to keep you updated in terms of everything that's happening in general practice. Andy, kick us off with the first one.
Okay, so a story quite close to home, actually. So GP leaders in Nottinghamshire or Nottingham specifically probably, seek compensation after trust IT faults disrupted service. It's got to Pulse have seen evidence that local GPs in Nottingham are seeking compensation for additional work and management following the introduction of a new IT system. So I guess this is something that we've been quite close to, Gandhi. So we kind of know quite a lot about
Yeah.
what's been happening, really. So do you want to give people the very brief lowdown, or shall I? Go on, you give them the lowdown, Gandhi.
Fine. So some people may be aware of some of the aspects where we have covered some of this in the past few series and episodes and things. Back in around about July time, the local hospital did an update to call the LIMS. I always forget what it stands for, but basically changing the pathology system in terms of how the information flows to general practice and obviously how they manage things in the hospital environment. This was due to necessary updates because of the archaicness of a lot of the digital software and tech that many hospitals are using, and it looks like there's going to be other places doing very similar. However, the unintended consequences of doing this is it basically screwed over general practice royally, significantly increasing the number of results because of the mechanisms that came through of how those results flowed, potentially then leading to duplicate results coming through, and then also bulk loading. So at points where we would have loads coming through and none for several days, and then loads coming through. And clearly that risk element that comes through is something that's been a massive concern. There has been absolutely attempts to try and fix this process. However, some of this is down to challenges in terms of the providers, as well as the hospital itself. And then, it's been going on since July, and it is, to be fair, awful in general practice in Nottingham because of this. The number of challenges that we have to face as a result of it, the clinical risk that comes from this is significant. However,
and the workload, the additional work required to mitigate the risk, because
absolutely,
not all the risk can be completely mitigated, but a lot of it can. But it requires additional graft by people working in GP practices to stay on top of this information, and that unbatching of results means that where we might have previously got a number of results together that can be viewed and you can understand the context of those results as they relate to one another. Iron levels with a blood count, for example, alongside U's and E's, used to view them together, come as separate results as a result of this, and at different times. So you kind of lose that context, and often you need to view the record multiple times where you would have previously had to view it once. And actually, sometimes people don't work every day. The results come to different people. Actually, different people might need to view those results. There might be action required for more than one of those results. So patients sometimes getting contacted kind of multiple times about blood that was drawn on the same day with the same or slightly different or additional plans, really, really confusing to patients, and I guess that's not the half of it. So carry on, Gandhi, but just
and I guess just to give you an example of that. So prior to this change, if we had an average, in practice on, say, for example, a Wednesday, I probably have 30 to 40 different patients' results to file for those clinicians who weren't in our practice on the basis of safety and my own that I would have to do. That would take me probably about 30 minutes or so, generally speaking. Because of the change that we've seen in this context, the number of those results have gone up significantly, looking to about 120 different instances of having to manage now on a typical Wednesday. I've had seen that's taking nearly 2.5 hours worth of work because of the way that information is also presented. It's not just the volume that's gone up, it's the complexity, as Andy mentioned. The reason why this has come through is because the LMC has now started to take this further. They're now looking at a legal case against the trust, but also I believe they're also looking at this against the software provider, which is where a lot of this has come through. Now, the problem with this, and my take on this, is that as ever, people don't think about the contracting mechanisms. So the provider is saying, we've done exactly what we were asked to do, and it's not our fault that there's this unintended consequence. And therefore, seems to be less of an impetus to try and fix it in the way, because apparently we can't go back. There's no time machine to allow that to happen. This is the reason why we're also raising this. Is unfortunately this has gone at a similar time now because of the length of time it's taken. That same trust has now updated its own EPR and was actually covered in the news before about the fact that the hospital went into a technical black alert, I believe, which it was a proper black alert, I think, compared to some of the other ones. So, it's a significant situation, and it shows the impact of digital transformation and how much risk there is if you do digital transformation wrong. And I guess the reason why we're keen to share this story is not only because it's a local story for both myself and Andy, which we've lived through for several months, but also a marker of why digital transformation has to be done correctly, where there are risks. And one of the things that many people seem to be doing right now is that tech is great, because it can be, but you cannot forget the risks of when something can go wrong. And this is a catastrophic event, in my view. The risk is incalculable in terms of what has happened to patient care. It is challenging to navigate, and it's going to be an interesting story to see what happens in the outcome of this.
I'd like to say two more things. So one is the risk of unintended consequences. Really pertinent point, and it just takes me back to the first story in terms of, I wonder what the unintended consequences in terms of the profile of demand, how it moves through the system and where it hits the system. General practice, emergency department, walk-in centres. What happens when you wholesale across the whole country change how every patient is able to access their GP all at once? And do we fully understand the impact that will have on the system? So just kind of raising a flag about that. And also, so I feel because I've have a place-based partnership role, so I've been kind of somewhat close, although not directly involved in the response to this. And I think people operating within that response would sort of say really quite rapidly after going live, when problems were apparent. I saw that bi-weekly meetings were stepped up that involved the LMC and the trust, and quite rapidly the ICB. Within 2 weeks, the ICB had declared a critical incident. There was, I think, quite good engagement or attempts to engage through the LMC and their apparatus to try and work with general practice and the hospital to try and resolve this. I didn't have proximity to conversations with the clinical providers, so I can't comment on their responsiveness. But I just feel that I sort of have to say that I sort of witnessed what appeared to me to be quite a good response from the system partners, including the LMC and the hospital. Notwithstanding huge amount of disruption, additional work done by GPs. I'm not surprised people are exploring, how that additional work is going to be paid for. But just thought I would say that.
It seems like it's not just in our area. So Jay Shapuri coming in with the comments. We've had similar issues in Warrington Hospital many times. Also, just don't understand the impact of this for primary care. I think one of the things I have learned over this journey is that we are quick in primary care sometimes to assume that it's the hospital trust that are responsible for this. Over time, one of the things that has become apparent to me is that in this particular situation, the hospital trusts are trying their best, but there are other factors that play into this that are beyond their control. Having said that, I still think that there was some data governance steps that maybe needed a bit more work on them before they went through this. And I know I've been vocal in that particular comment, but let's move on, shall we? So we're talking about ICB people. There's another news story, isn't there, Andy, about ICBs?
Yeah, I think we can probably do this one fairly quickly. So, so NHS England is being abolished, disbanded, wrapped up into Department of Health and down into ICBs in terms of how its activities are going to be distributed. At the same time, that 50% of staff in ICBs, on average across the country, are likely to be released. There's been a 50% reduction in spend on staff as for ICBs. That left the Department of Health with potentially a big bill to make people redundant, and it wasn't quite clear how that was going to be paid for. And this was unexpected and came after the spending review settlements, outlining that additional 29 billion for general practice. So there was some dispute about how this was going to be paid for, and it sounds like that's been resolved. And it looks like the resolution is that there will not be additional money for the NHS to pay these redundancies, but there will be flexibility within the additional pay settlement over the 3 years of the 29 billion to bring forwards some of that funding from later years, where you expect to make savings because you're paying less people, into the closer years, sort of, I guess, this year and the next year, to pay for those redundancies. So to shift some of that money around within the spending envelope to make it possible to afford these redundancies within years. So so that's what the story is, and I guess the bottom line is it kind of facilitates these redundancies to now sort of move forwards. I guess we work with kind of colleagues who work at the ICB. It's a difficult time for them. I've got an ICB funded role, so I'm not quite sure what's happening to me, because I think that the clinical leadership budget is not excluded from these. So it's a difficult times, but I think it's I think we do just need to communicate that there's been an agreement sort of found in a pathway forwards to facilitate those redundancies. Do you have anything else to add, Gandhi, on that?
Well, the only thing that does slightly frustrate me about this story is that there was almost like a celebratory aspect to this, in terms of they found the money, and that to make all these people redundant, and it comes across a little bit callous, to be honest. That it was almost celebrated that they've done this, and it kind of makes you think that actually, if this was the plan, should have thought about this a hell of a lot sooner. It shouldn't be a case of 4 to 6 months after you've announced something that you're figuring out how you're going to make it work. And I have to admit, a lot of what Wes has done since he's taken over Health Minister has actually been justified, reasoned, understandable, sensible in even some situations, particularly compared to some of our previous secretaries of health. This one, I don't think. And it just smacks of a tone of, almost an element, if I dare say, of Trumpism with it, to me. So, I think this is not a great news story, not just in the sense that obviously we're talking about people's jobs and things, but actually this is nothing to celebrate about. And the spin that they're putting on it, that we're saving billions. Well, they're not. They're spending it. They're spending it before they even get it. They're taking from Peter to pay Paul, basically.
Yes. I agree. I agree with you. There's obviously been some toing and froing between the Treasury and Department of Health. Department of Health hoping that the Treasury, I guess, would stump up for the money, and they're not, but they provide the flexibility within the spending settlement. But anyway, it's proceeding. So
it is.
That's that.
Next story then, Andy. So
final story is interesting, because this is something that we were talking about a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So the story is so at LMC conference in Manchester, there was a motion asking for state-backed GP indemnity to cover AI triage and I guess failures or liabilities when things go wrong with that triage. And also to cover some of the liabilities around GP's responsibilities as data controllers, so responsible for managing people's data, patients' data, under Information Commission Office regulations that actually have really, really high fines for mishandling information, and with GPs being operating as traditional partnerships, those of us who are partners obviously have unlimited personal liability to the point of declaring bankrupt, selling your house, selling your car, if you end up having to cover these liabilities, which actually has become an obstacle to some of the things that the government wants to do around data, because they change the contract or mandate that general practice does things around access to this to patient data without providing the indemnity against when things go wrong. So they tell you to do something, but it's your fault if what they've told you to do causes a problem, and you wouldn't want to do it unless you were being forced to. So so the motion asks that that state indemnity, so the state-backed cover, covers data controller responsibilities and problems that might arise through the use of AI triage. Just scrolling down to the motion in full. Also asking to cover the Equalities Act of 2010, which I think also has unlimited liability, potentially, if you if you fall foul of that in terms of your treatment of patients or staff with regards to that. So I quite welcome this, actually. And in some ways, this is the sort of conversation that I think that we should be having looking forward to our negotiations with the government, and what needs to be in a new contract in an environment where the world is changing and we have increasing reliance on technology and AI, and the management of data is important. I feel we should be talking more about this sort of thing rather than, I guess, who said what in February 2025. But what do you think, Gandhi?
I mean, for me, this is an absolute sensible thing to make happen, because actually, if the government is insisting that general practice takes on increased liability as data controllers, then actually they should also be covering that liability to some degree and be partners in it. If they are saying that you do not have financial coverage for mistakes because of something we're making you do, then that would, in my mind, makes them the data controller. So then the liability sits with the NHS England itself. Now, well, does that mean when NHS England becomes abolished? That's a completely different aspect of it. But yeah, this is if you wanted to make the data sharing agreements work, to reduce the resistance, to make it more sensible and speed up the integration of records, this is the best way to make it happen. Now, obviously, the question, well, they don't want the Treasury to fund this. They don't want to have this line on their ledger as such because the risk associated with it. That in itself shows that they know it's something that's icky. So again, why are you forcing people to put themselves in a potentially libelous situation? I don't know.
Liabilitous, maybe.
I don't know. Maybe making up words here. Yeah. It's almost 9:30.
Yeah,
it's been a long day.
But I agree. This would actually strikes me as a fairly tidy solution to those risks that we've identified. So I quite like this motion, and hopefully it becomes part of the negotiating position for the BMA and the GPC in the contract negotiations. And as I said before, I think this is exactly the sort of thing that we should be talking about. So that's the final story, Gandhi.
It is. So just before we get to Andy's answers, I guess just mentioning in terms of the stories that we've covered. So we've talked about the battle lines being drawn in terms of what's happening in general practice and the challenges that many of us are seeing in terms of, the impact that was the contract negotiations on the back of the LMC conference, where, it was agreed that they would seek undated resignations from the profession. Following that, we had a letter from Stephen Kinnock talking about the fact that actually, from the government's perspective, they feel that, there has been incorrect information and allegations made, and actually that they had always stated that they were not going to agree to the changes of software suppliers in preparation of the 1st of October changes. And it seems that Pulse have some information that may confirm that as well. We haven't seen it, but we will see. We then talked about some documents, didn't we, Andy?
We did. So we talked about the strategic commissioning framework, which we'll go into detail at a future date. And we talked about advanced foundation guidance and the consultation around that and the implications for general practice and the additional steer that we get about the role of integrated health organizations, contracts, not organizations, so probably to be held by advanced foundations. Watch this space, potential implications for how GP contracts are managed and held. And then we did 3 stories, which were around GP leaders seeking compensation for IT failures and problems with switching IT systems. That's something that was affecting us in Nottingham. We didn't celebrate that the ICB redundancy bill has been found in terms of the ability to pay the projected redundancy costs for removing 50% of staff from ICBs and Department of Health. That's going to be
NHS England. Yep.
And NHS, Department of Health is staying standing. NHS England is going. And finally, I guess we did celebrate calls at the LMC meeting in Manchester for state-backed indemnity to cover AI triage liabilities for GP partners and GP practices, and also their liabilities as data controllers and liabilities on the Equalities Act 2010. If they can do that, quite a tidy solution to additional risks from those areas. And, it's one of those things that would make partnership that little bit more attractive again to younger GPs, which is great.
So keen to know if any of you watching us live have got any comments or questions on those aspects that you wanted to put in. This is your opportunity to do so whilst me and Andy finish off on our wavelength game. So just to explain, this is the lovely wavelength we've got. I gave Andy the challenge of trying to figure out what I was thinking when it came to whether or not patients need to be admitted or self-care. And I gave the example of a 20-year-old who's generally fit and well, who's seeing you with a respiratory rate of 35. Andy put it all the way at the other end, saying he's going to admit this patient.
He's going in. There's not a lot that would stop him.
Yeah.
There's not a lot that I could think of that would stop him going in. And Josh Puri agrees as well. Just brought him onto the screen. I think he was agreeing with me on that. So what's where is it, Gandhi?
All right, let's see where you guys are in comparison to my. I think so. Oh, so good so far. Good so far. Oh,
music. Oh my goodness, he's not going in. Well, so I guess is that because there might be things that you discover when you tell him that stop him going in, I guess. Yeah.
So I guess in my head when I came up with the case, I was thinking potentially somebody with a cough, cold, possibly maybe thinking pneumonia. I don't know, but I was trying not to give you too much information at the same time, because it's hard to then say, well, if you're not meant to give loads first of all, but I don't know. We didn't get on the wavelength this time. Maybe it'll happen next time.
We've been so much better before.
Maybe it's just because I'm so tired today, Andy. That could be it.
But hey. With it.
Mm-hmm. So if you do want any extra information and stuff, as ever, make sure to check out what we're doing here on eGP Learning. A quick thing that I will say to many of you out there, if you haven't signed up for it already, please do, for our PCM Plus 2026 conference. This is in April. It's going to be an absolutely stellar conference, and obviously particularly focused on being after the contract has been confirmed, agreed, or whatever it's going to be, because it's in April. But last year's event was absolutely amazing. This year's event is going to be even better, even bigger. And last year we sold out within a month, and tickets are going fast as well. So if you want to come and join us, you need to make sure you're joining in that. To do that, it's bit.ly/PCM plus 26. It is case sensitive, and get your opportunity to join. Like I say, tickets are going fast. And as ever, we'll be here to take and answer your primary care and learning. And we'll catch you in the next episode. See you later, guys.